Welcome back, everyone, to Philippine Stories Deep Dive channel.
It's great to be back.
You know, our listeners are really keyed into what's going on in the Philippines. And they sent over some, well, really significant information, actually.
Oh, is this about Duterte?
Yeah, it is. It's about the arrest and then, wow, his appearance at the International Criminal Court, the ICC.
Yeah, no, it's huge, huge. It's a moment, well, I think a lot of people have been kind of waiting for. It's been a long time coming with all the questions about, about accountability for what happened during his administration. And this whole thing from the arrest in Manila to, him actually showing up in The Hague, it really raises some really big questions about international law, like how far it can actually reach.
Okay, so let's try to break this whole thing down. Let's start from the beginning with the actual arrest itself. Just reading through this, it sounds like it was super coordinated. He was escorted by the police and Interpol when he got back from Hong Kong.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the fact that Interpol was involved, that's really key here. It shows just how seriously they're taking this warrant from the ICC. This isn't just some local matter.
Right.
And then they took him straight into custody right there at the airbase, Villamor Air Base. And you have to remember, this whole thing, it stems from this big ICC investigation, right? Into crimes against humanity, specifically all the extrajudicial killings, all those EJKs during his war on drugs.
And the timing here is actually really interesting because, just so everyone remembers, the Philippines, it's not an ICC member anymore, right? Duterte himself pulled the country out back in 2019. So how is it that the ICC can even, do anything about this now?
That's a great question. It's a little complicated, but the thing is, even though the Philippines withdrew, the ICC still has the power to look into any crimes that might have happened while the country was still a member. It's like, think of it like this. If someone, robs a bank in one state and then drives to another state, they can still be arrested and tried in the state where they committed the crime, right?
Right. Makes sense.
So in this case, because all those alleged crimes happened before the Philippines left the ICC, well, they still have jurisdiction.
Okay, I see. So it's about when things happen, not necessarily where someone is now.
Exactly. And another interesting thing is that the current administration, even though they said at first they wouldn't cooperate with the ICC, they ended up working with Interpol to make the arrest happen. They said it was about keeping those law enforcement relationships, reciprocal.
Yeah, makes sense. There's a lot at stake in those kinds of relationships. There was this one detail about the arrest that really jumped out at me. It said that Duterte was, quote, chewing gum to appear nonchalant.
Oh, wow.
It seems small, but it's kind of telling, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. It could be him trying to just act like he doesn't care, like a show of defiance. But for a lot of people, especially those who have been pushing for justice for all those who died during the drug war, seeing him taken into custody, it's a big deal.
Absolutely. And the number of deaths is just staggering. The police say at least 6,000. But some human rights groups put the number closer to 20,000. That's a huge difference.
It is a huge difference. And we have to remember, these killings, they didn't just start when he became president. They go way back to his time as mayor of Davao City, starting around 2011.
Yeah, you're right. That's a long time, over a decade of these alleged abuses. And it just adds to the seriousness of the charges he's facing now.
It absolutely does. And speaking of Davao, your information brought up the case of Leila de Lima.
Oh, right.
You remember, she was the one investigating those killings in Davao, and then she ended up facing those drug charges, right? Charges that, well, a lot of people saw as basically just a way to silence her.
Yeah, and she was in prison for years until she was finally acquitted in 2024.
Right. And after Duterte's arrest, she said, and I'm quoting here, "Today, Duterte is being made to answer. This is not about vengeance. This is about justice finally taking its course." That really says it all, It's been a long fight for accountability.
It really shows how much courage it takes to stand up to people in power, especially when the stakes are so high.
Absolutely.
Now, there's this statement from Malacanang. They're really emphasizing that due process was followed to the letter during the arrest. They even mentioned that the prosecutor general served the ICC notification, that government doctors examined Duterte, that the police all wore body cameras. It seems like they're going above and beyond to make sure everything was by the book.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like they're trying to draw a contrast with the way due process was, well, let's be honest, often disregarded during the drug war itself.
Right. It's like they're trying to say, look, we're doing this the right way,
Exactly. And all this meticulousness, it's probably a way to head off any claims of, something being fishy or unfair. They want to show everyone they're following the rules, which honestly is a big change from what we saw during the drug war. And there were reports that people were actually praising the government for how carefully they handled the arrest, especially because there were worries that he might try to, disappear or something.
It sounds like they were really worried about him slipping away.
It seems that way, which shows just how high profile and sensitive this whole situation is.
Yeah, for sure. And we shouldn't forget what Duterte himself has said about all of this.
Huh.
In those House committee hearings, he was completely unapologetic about the drug war. I remember that quote, "Do not question my policies because I offer no apologies, no excuses. I did what I had to do, and whether you believe it or not, I did it for my country."
Wow. I mean, that statement, it's just so revealing. It shows how strongly he believed in what he was doing and how little he cared about what anyone else thought. And then he went on to say that he actually told the police to, encourage suspects to fight back so they could justify killing them in self-defense.
It's chilling.
It is. And Sheldiono, he made this great point that Duterte probably thought he was completely untouchable, But as he said, history catches up with even the most ruthless despots. And I think we're seeing that play out now.
It does feel like a kind of reckoning. So thinking about the bigger picture here,
Yeah.
what do you think this arrest means for the Philippines? I mean, there's this concern about his allies causing trouble, right?
Yeah.
Potentially some political instability.
Yeah, that's definitely a real worry. Something this big with a former president who still has a lot of support, it could easily stir things up. And then there's the issue of witnesses. They're going to need people to come forward, people who lost loved ones, maybe even former police or soldiers, people who can testify about what they saw.
That's going to be a tough process, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. Sensitive and potentially dangerous, too.
It's being called a historic moment, and I guess it really is. I mean, it's the first time a Philippine president has ever been arrested and brought before the ICC. I can't imagine how this is going to impact the Philippines' reputation globally.
Yeah, no, it's a huge deal. I mean, it sends a message, a really powerful message about accountability. It shows that even presidents, even former presidents, can be held responsible for human rights abuses. And it also shows that international justice, it can actually work. It has teeth.
It does feel like a bit of a turning point, and it's a stark contrast, right?
Right.
Between the whole Punisher image he cultivated and now facing trial in The Hague.
Yeah,
It's almost surreal in a way.
it is. It's a powerful image. Okay, so let's move on to his actual appearance at the ICC. He appeared via video link from that detention center in The Hague on Friday, March 14th.
Can you imagine?
It must have been an incredible moment. And, this is historic on another level, too. He's the first former Asian leader to ever appear before the ICC.
Wow.
Yeah. During the hearing, he just confirmed his name and date of birth, the basic stuff. But of course, the real issue is the charges against him. I mean, they're incredibly serious. Crimes against humanity related to the war on drugs. And the estimated death toll, it's just horrifying. When you combine all the different estimates, it could be as high as 30,000 people.
That's just unthinkable.
It is. And it's that scale, the sheer number of victims, that's why the ICC got involved.
Makes sense. So it sounds like they moved pretty quickly to get him to The Hague. He arrived just the day before the hearing on a government-chartered jet.
Yeah, it was fast. And that shows how seriously both the Philippines and the ICC are taking all of this. The presiding judge, Ayulia Motak, she allowed the video link, which makes sense. I mean, it's a long trip and there's that big time difference.
Yeah, of course. But his lawyer, Salvador Medialdea, he came out swinging, calling the whole thing an abduction, even kidnapping. That's pretty strong language. What does that term, extrajudicial rendition, usually mean in international law?
So extrajudicial rendition, it usually means taking someone from one country to another without following the proper legal steps, like going through extradition agreements. It usually happens in secret, and it often means the person is taken to a country where they could be tortured or face an unfair trial.
Okay, so it's basically a forced disappearance, but across borders.
Right. And when Minialdea uses that term, he's basically trying to say that the ICC doesn't have any right to be doing this.
Yeah, trying to undermine the legitimacy of the whole thing.
Exactly. And then Minialdea also claimed that Duterte was too sick to participate, saying he had all these debilitating medical issues. But the court doctor examined him and said he was mentally fit.
So someone's not being honest here.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there's some maneuvering going on. And how the court decides to handle Duterte's fitness is going to be really important.
For sure. So they've already set a date for a pretrial hearing, September 23rd. Can you walk us through what happens at that stage?
Sure. The pretrial hearing, it's basically where the judges look at all the evidence that the prosecutor has put together. And both sides, the prosecution and the defense, they get to make their arguments. It's kind of like a mini trial before the real trial. And the judges, they decide if there's enough evidence to actually move forward with a full-blown trial. If they do go to trial, it could take years. And if he's convicted, the maximum sentence at the ICC is life in prison.
Wow, okay. Life in prison. So the stakes are really high.
They are. The information you sent also mentions some things about the arrest in Manila. Like, he apparently threatened a police general and refused to be fingerprinted. He even said, "You have to kill me to bring me to The Hague." I mean, it sounds like vintage Duterte.
Yeah, it does.
But then, when he got to The Hague, he posted this video on Facebook where he said, "I have been telling the police, the military, that it was my job and I am responsible."
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like he might be trying to take some responsibility or at least make it look that way for the international community. It's interesting how his tone shifted, maybe trying to control the narrative a little.
It's definitely a shift.
Yeah.
So there's also this mention of demonstrations in The Hague on May 14th.
Hmm.
But didn't the arrest just happen in March? That date seems off.
Yeah, you're right. That May date is probably a typo or maybe refers to some older protests about the drug war. But either way, it shows how much attention this case is getting around the world.
Yeah, people are definitely watching. And then there's this whole other layer of drama with the apparent falling out between the Duterte and Marcos families.
Oh, right.
I mean, Sarah Duterte, she's his daughter and she's the vice president, but she's reportedly facing an impeachment trial. And she flew all the way to the Netherlands to support her dad, calling his arrest oppression and persecution. And then the family even tried to get the Supreme Court to stop his transfer, but they failed.
It's like a whole soap opera playing out alongside the legal drama.
It really is. And Sarah Duterte, outside the court, she said they're hoping to move up that initial appearance so they can start talking strategy with the lawyers. It seems like they're, even though they're protesting the whole thing, they're still trying to work within the system.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? They're fighting it, but they're also playing the game. And it's so different from that nonchalant image during the arrest. And we can't forget all the things Duterte said during his campaign, all those promises about cracking down on drugs, even saying there would be so many bodies in Manila Bay. And then once he was in office, he was constantly urging people to kill drug dealers and addicts.
Yeah, it was terrifying to watch, honestly.
It was. And all those statements, they're going to be front and center in the ICC's case.
Definitely. And it's still so shocking to me that the official police numbers for the deaths are so much lower than what human rights groups are saying.
Right. It's a huge difference, and it matters because it shows just how much the government might be downplaying what really happened. And we know that most of the victims were poor men living in cities.
Yeah. And even with all the international criticism and now this arrest, he's still really popular with a lot of people in the Philippines. There were protests against his arrest in Mindanao and the Visayas, his strongholds. And just last year, during a Senate inquiry, he said again, no apologies, no excuses.
Wow. He's really sticking to his guns, isn't he?
He is. But for all those who've been fighting for justice, for the victims and their families, this arrest, it's a sign of hope. Amnesty International called it a symbolic moment and a day of hope. And the ICC's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, he said is really important for the victims and for international justice.
It's a big step, for sure. And that pretrial hearing in September, it's going to be a major moment in this whole story.
Okay, so wrapping things up here. This whole situation with Duterte, it's incredibly complicated. It touches on so many things: justice, accountability, the rule of law, not just in the Philippines, but globally. And it shows just how divided the country is over the whole drug war and what it meant. We're going to be following this story closely, but here's something for all of us to think about. When a leader, when a former president even, says they're responsible for actions that led to thousands of deaths, what's the responsibility of the legal system, both in their own country and internationally? How do we make sure there's accountability? And how do we make sure the victims, the families, get some measure of justice? This story is far from over, and we'll be here to unpack it every step of the way.